Hey everyone, I know this is uh, the first one this week, so it probably is gonna have a slow roll as people straggle into it. But in the meantime, if you want to put any questions you may have, where you're joining from, that would be really good. All right, I think there's someone from India, and then I see Virginia from Chicago. I think a bunch of more people are going to join. We'll take another maybe minute and then just kick it off. And if you have any specific questions, please do add into the chat and we will get to those. This event is getting live streamed. So hopefully, you are able to join us either through Zoom or through the live stream, and we will share the recordings shortly. All right, I am going to kick us off. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We are going to talk about Health Cloud and AI and how AI can improve your care delivery and potentially automate your business operations. So let's dive into it. My name is Saurabh Gupta. I am the CEO and co-founder of Cloud Compliance and GPTfy. We are a Salesforce App Exchange ISV partner, and we predominantly focus on enabling AI in Salesforce, data security, data privacy, compliance, that kind of space. Let's start with a disclaimer. This is not legal advice. This is not Salesforce's point of view. It's just our individual perspective based on our experience with customers, being customers ourselves of Salesforce, and just with a general understanding of things with our professional life. Everything you're hearing here is for informational purposes only. And please do not make any decisions based on a webinar. With that out of the way, a nod to our sponsors. We really appreciate the support we've gotten from all of the folks who are on this call, our speakers, and from our sponsors in terms of the time and effort to make this happen. A little bit more on Enterprise Dream, a virtual conference. A lot of these sessions have happened already, and there's a bunch more. It really falls into two tracks. You can dream with AI, which is the idea of the possibilities, which is this session here as well. And there are a couple more in the next 2 days for document automation and financial services. And then if you're on this path and you're embarking on your AI journey, there are sessions where we're talking about security, build versus buy, build your roadmap, etc. All of these are getting recorded, and we will share resources at the end of this session around how can you get access to recordings if you've missed some of the prior ones. With that out of the way, a little bit on the agenda. We'll go through an introduction of our speakers. We will talk about the industry, healthcare, particularly the overview, the challenges with it. We'll get into some of the use cases and some considerations from a security and architecture perspective. We'll take a look at a few of these use cases in a health cloud or a regular service cloud type environment, and we'll share some resources. As you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we will get to them, as things progress. So with that, let me set a little bit of context. You've all heard AI is here. With Salesforce, you can do a lot of magical things, but what are they, right? A very, very simple way to think about it is all of this grunt work that we have today, our users have today, where they're jumping from a case to comments to documents to emails, where they're jumping from opportunities and notes on it, where they're jumping from care and care assessment plans and care goals and all of the other stuff in Health Cloud. All of those things where there's a lot of manual effort, a lot of workaround, a lot of grunt work, AI can help us automate some of them. And that automation can be personalized, automatically generating an email draft that is more personalized than what we get with an email template. It could be summarizing case notes, which is a pretty important area in healthcare. It could be looking at an account holistically. What are the open opportunities, the open cases, the open care plan, and things like that. So if you have a patient, how can you get a 360? And I know our speakers are going to talk a lot more about, all of these things. But the point is, AI is now giving you yet another tool in your arsenal to take a lot of what happens today and streamline it, automate it, enrich it, enhance it. So one more perspective on this is, where do you need to focus, or where should you focus when you think about AI? There are certain challenges, when you think about any new technology, and almost always good use cases are things that bring high business value to your organization, to your customers, significantly improve user experience, reduce cost, all of that. And also that have lower nuances, which means you don't need to train AI into specific areas, because that can be a time-consuming and expensive effort. So really things that you can do immediately that bring a lot of value to your business. And as commonsensical as this sounds, I've seen this go awry a lot of times. And the point here is just find those use cases that are a direct fit for generative AIs, think ChatGPT, and identify which of them would be valued by your customers, your users, and such. So that's really the way to think about it. And we're going to talk a lot about use cases that fit in this quadrant. Anything else that is a lot of value for your organization, but has a lot of nuances, needs to be trained. One example that comes to my mind always is fraud detection for medical claims. But that requires a lot of training of AI so that it can, spot those kind of claims without giving a lot of false positives. Those may be great use cases, but you may want to put them out in future so that you're leading with value. So that's really it. And this is a little bit more on the same explanation, right? Promising use cases, maybe personalized emails, account summary, things like that. Good value, low nuance. Great future use cases, highly customized codes, fraud detection, stuff like this. Great business value. AI may not be ready for it today. You may have to train it. This is like a 6 months, a year type horizon, maybe more. You may need to have expertise. You may need to hire people who do this kind of work. And then things that really don't bring that much value are low volume, low revenue impact, and just require a lot of training for AI. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jake.
Sure. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jake Harwood. I work with Slalom, which is Salesforce's #3 partner globally and in North America. And I have the privilege of leading the Salesforce Health Cloud team here. Came from more of a provider background, worked at Epic for a long while, did implementation work there, and then shifted over into the consumer engagement space. And my work over the past probably 5 years now has really been focused on how we can leverage more declarative tools that aren't an electronic health record to improve consumer and patient and caregiver and provider experience across healthcare and life sciences. And I will turn it over to Tina.
Thanks, Jake. Hey everyone, Tina Whittle. I'm a senior solution architect specifically in the Salesforce space, and I'm delivering solutions to HTC Global. HTC Global, if you're not familiar with them, are 11,000 strong. They're very, very deep into coding and data analysis, which is perfectly positioned in the data cloud, LLMs, and AI. Those of us in the Salesforce world have not heard of them. I really recommend you look them up. I was surprised at how strong and deep their resources are. For this use cases, have use cases on the mind big time with the discussion we're going to have today. But for this, what you need to know, my background is I have healthcare in the hospital, home health, nursing homes, along with outpatient treatment centers. Taking that broad experience and applying it in the Salesforce ecosystem in healthcare, it's been a joy doing that. I've been doing that for like the last 6 years. I'm happy to be here and talk about this really exciting topic.
Right.
All right, we're going to talk about the health industry, the overview and challenges. If you're not familiar with healthcare, this might be a little bit more, but we really want to address what those challenges are. And I'm happy to chat with you afterwards. The Enterprise Streaming LinkedIn page, if you want to go in deeper on this, but this is geared to the understanding that you have a little bit of understanding of healthcare. We want to move on. We're going to talk about overview. Thank you. The industry. So we're looking at 4 components. We're looking at providers, payers, pharmaceutical, and MedTech. When we're talking about providers, we are talking about doctors and nurses, but we're also talking about hospitals and clinics. So overall, who's taking care of that patient, who's engaging with them? So what are the current, how's the industry today and challenges? When COVID happened, it really devastated the provider space because all of those elective surgeries and lab processes and all of that stopped. It was an all stop. And those elective procedures are the bread and butter. They're the real profit makers in healthcare for the provider space. Another thing that happened is your staffing and your talent. You're having provider burnouts, you're having less providers available, and the ones who are still there are asking for more money. Right or wrong, they want to be paid for what they're providing, and they want their wages adjusted. So you have less staff, you have higher wage requirements. Interest rates, your cost of goods have gone up. So that's another impact on the ROI for when they're doing their pricing. And also pop health. There is sicker patients, older patients, sicker patients, and more of them. So they have to take that into consideration when they're looking at the provider space. And there's more. I'm just giving you highlights. In the payer, this is your insurance companies and so forth. They're the yin-yang. Providers and payers are yin-yang. Payers overall are doing actually well, but they have a lot of challenges in the aspect of you can have 100 members for an insurance company. They have 100 members. The percentage of their older and sicker members is growing. So you look at Sally, the member, she was recently diagnosed with diabetes or COPD, and she could be going in and out of the hospital system. What you want to do as a payer, you want to engage and stop that cycle and stabilize your member and proactively get them into a better health, because ultimately that impacts your bottom line, because you do not, as a payer, want to be constantly putting money into high critical care. You want to stabilize, and that maintenance mode is much easier to do and also less expensive. In pharmaceutical, it is very much about getting not only the market share from the provider space, but also the consumer. So in pharmaceutical, there's constantly new medications coming out. They're marketing it. They're actually having people going out and engaging with the provider saying, hey, Dr. Bob, I'd like you to prescribe this to your patients, and this is why. There's also the consumer marketing that happens and trying to get market share and having the consumers, hey, go ask your doctor about this. And then there's the staffing and the sales enablement. So it's very much a sales cycle in Salesforce. It is a sales cycle. Sales Cloud is really where you have it until you get into your consumers or patients onboarded. But there is a constant sales and marketing cycle that's happening in there. And also with MedTech, it is about market share competition. There's a couple of different ways you can look at MedTech. You could be thinking about who is the representative who's in the surgery rooms, having medical equipment there for the surgeon. It could be that you're selling X-ray equipment, or digital health. You could be selling, oh, we have a watch that'll measure your heart rate and your blood pressure. It goes to an app, and then downstream providers are consuming that information for monitoring. That is also a very competitive industry, and getting that market share, the competition and the sales enablement is also a big challenge, and they're constantly going through that. So with that, let's take it a little bit deeper in the provider space, because we'll be here forever if we did all of them. So Jake, you want to go deeper in the provider space?
Sure. And we wanted to do a deep dive in provider because I think that's where a lot of folks, particularly in this call, are coming from. Tina covered a lot of sort of who the providers are, those folks in the organizations at the pointy end of the stick. And we've all been alive and looking at the news for the past 3 years and have recognized that it's a really challenging market right now. Full of applications that AI can help with and full of things that it can't. And what we wanted to do today is really talk about some realistic applications and use cases for AI, both discriminative and generative, but not say that it's going to solve the world. And I think it's particularly salient in the provider space where you have this really high burden of structured work that is input intensive, highly repetitive, and there's a transformation afoot from the way that we've always done things, that has been this fee-for-service model, to really taking care of people and populations. If there is one thing that I'm keen for everyone to take away from this presentation, it is that AI is powerful and transformational, and it's not a panacea. It is not going to solve and fix healthcare. There is a lot in American healthcare that needs fixing, and it's going to take more than this to do it. And it is most relevant to these use cases that are straightforward in the beginning and likely not patient-facing. At the bottom, I stuck a quote from a research note in JAMA Oncology from a couple of weeks ago on the use of artificial intelligence chatbots for cancer treatment and applying LLMs to cancer treatment. 1/3 of the treatments, so they looked at 4 different prompts given to a Gen AI model for stage 1 breast cancer, were at least partially non-concordant with national cancer community guidelines. So 1/3 of how do I treat or how might I approach stage 1 breast cancer responses from this large language model were incorrect. And the chatbot was likely to mix in correct and incorrect information, making it more difficult for a human to figure out what's right or what's not. You've been paying attention to the news. You've probably heard about that lawyer who put a request into ChatGPT to come up with a case brief, and it just made up citations and it made up case law. And that's something that I think we're really concerned about in healthcare, because if you make up a treatment goal for somebody, or if the AI hallucinate, we have a lower tolerance for risk. Healthcare has historically been pretty far behind the rest of the world, and it's because we have people's lives that we're worried about. So what we want to do is give some really realistic places that AI can play in the healthcare and the life sciences space, and then be able to talk about how we build up to those use cases. So let's jump forward into use cases. We're going to have one for each of the subverticals, and I'll start with providers. This is something that I think is super interesting when we think about clinically informed marketing. So if you're from or have been around healthcare in the US, you know that we have this lovely thing called HIPAA, which really highly regulates the way that we can communicate with patients and communicate with consumers about their health needs. And one of the things that I think we can do really well with AI, which goes through large amounts of data quickly on the discriminative side, is understand who might be a really good target for limited capacity that we have, and take advantage of this huge amount of structured and unstructured data and be able to do something with it, so that we are allowing the AI to be sort of a identifier and a co-pilot, but we're still keeping real people in the decision loop, so that we can refine the way that AI is putting things forward. And instead of it being responsible for identifying and sending collateral, it's responsible for identifying people, teeing something up, and then bringing it to a real human being for review. So this use case, which I think will appear in a click, looks all through evaluating chronic disease registries and engagement data and available appointment slots. So if you've ever tried to get an appointment with a specialist, you know that it's very difficult to do. But there are specialties that are looking to fill slots, or there are places that we're looking to fill imaging time. And so we can look at all of the available open appointment capacity that we have, understand what people might be able to go into that appointment capacity. We can do that very easily on the discriminative side, and then give folks a risk score and a prioritization to then evaluate with a outbound marketing campaign. We can use generative AI to say, what does Jake respond to? Does he respond to like a call to action? Does he respond to being guilt tripped into going to see his provider because it's been too long? What are the things that have worked? And then how can we generate a couple of different potential message payloads or subject lines that we might be able to give to a marketer and put that in front of somebody to say, pick one of these 3 for this patient cohort, rather than we're going to let AI do the entire thing itself. We can also flag high-risk folks for human follow-up. So if we have a team of nurse navigators and we've got somebody in this campaign who has an outstanding cardiology visit or cardiology referral, but also has poorly controlled diabetes and hasn't been in for a lower extremity check, we can look at all of those things and say, you're actually not a great candidate for digital engagement, but you're a very good candidate for human engagement. When we think about it from a pharmaceutical perspective, very, very different. This is another place where we see AI as the co-pilot. And I'm not just saying that because it's Microsoft's branded name for their AI thing, but it's really the way that we're thinking about AI in healthcare applications right now, is somebody sort of sitting next to you rather than taking the steering wheel. We've seen how well that's gone in automotive lately. Patient services contact centers are a place that are highly structured and where there's a lot of information that somebody needs to take in. So if you've ever seen a drug commercial, because the US does that, and it has a phone number that you might be able to call to either access copay assistance, or if you're on therapy, particularly for rare disease or expensive therapies, there are contact centers that are typically staffed by either patient services representatives or in some cases clinicians, where you call and you're like, I have hives. Is that a thing that I'm allergic to, or is that a reaction to the medication that I've begun taking. We typically have those set up in Salesforce with knowledge articles and cases and case documentation. And what we can do in this context with a use case is we can apply a LLM to the persistent transcript of a chat or of a call in a pharmaceutical patient services center. And then we can go and automatically pre-populate a case with the documentation that a person would ordinarily be required to type in, as well as what the other knowledge articles that we might send to the patient are, what the other patient-facing material or collateral that we could give them are. And we can begin to pre-populate that so that, like we see in provider clinical documentation, if you go to the doctor's office, they're staring at Epic the entire time and it's pre-populated, and they're just saying, here are the pertinent negatives or the pertinent positives. We can recreate some of that pre-documentation and then allow a human being to go in and say, this is different, this is different, this is different. Now I'm going to commit that and take some of the administrative and documentation burden off of them where they'd just be typing away on a keyboard. So again, a space where we can leverage both discriminative and generative AI to understand what's going on, to do some prioritization, to do some generation, and then keeping a human being in the decision loop so that before something goes out, we're getting a final review. So that's the overall. I'm going to pass over to Tina to talk through payers and MedTech.
Thanks, Jake. I would like to pause for a second and go back to something that Jake said, and that the world of technology is exciting right now, very much exciting. And there's a lot of possibility. But in healthcare, a lot of what we're talking about are immediate use cases that have to be done very, very carefully. And you really need to sort through between the sparkle of the new and be very, very careful and make sure that you have the human intervention. So a couple of things that Jake were talking about is we have to be really careful of the technology. We have to be really careful to make sure we have human intervention. And that the two that I'm going to go through, one of them actually is not even Health Cloud. So Health Cloud has a use case, and we're talking about healthcare and Health Cloud, Salesforce Health Cloud. But there's also things that you need to keep in mind with that. And I just want to really affirm what Jake said, tread carefully, very, very carefully here. So pivoting to case management, and I don't know if you all hear my cat who basically decided now is the time to talk to me. Apologies. But basically, let's go into the case management. And Saurabh, you're just having too much fun with the clickety-click. I'm in case management. Go back.
I thought I'm on case management. Am I not?
He's there. Yeah.
You are, but now the picture, okay. Technology, and we all work in technology. Isn't it a wonderful thing? All right. So, and yes, you had the pairs case management. I was looking for my picture to hide it, but basically case management. This is where the promise is the biggest. A more immediate promise is when you have your documentation. So those of you who are not familiar with case management, think from the payer, the member management, think of Sally, our sick patient, who's basically going back and forth to the hospital or needing intervention. The documentation needed for case managers is intense. Not only do they get flagged on the member needs intervention, they call the member, they document information. They're doing a clinical assessment. They're looking at where they're at or documenting all this information. Then their documentation can be in multiple places. In Health Cloud, they can have documentation in emails, they can have documentation in cases, assessments, all over the place, case notes and everything. And this is hard, because not only do the case management need to go through and collect all the data and send it out to providers, but if you're having audits and things like that, where they need to go through and piece together, that is very, very labor intensive. And many, many times you're going to hear in healthcare how much time is spent on documentation. So when we're looking at our use case, thank you. We're looking at our use case. We're basically saying right now today, you actually could have GPT go through and pick out through all of your different areas that you keep your documentation and create a summary document. And that would be perfect and applicable today, where it goes through gathers up all these notes and puts it in a summary, a conversational summary that can then be sent to the provider, that could be then provided to the auditor and so forth. It could be provided to utilization management if they want to be looking and doing a chart review for processing claims. These are great use cases. Epic is doing this where they're looking at their documentation and bringing it together. There's other pilots going on related to how do we ease the burden of documentation versus the time it's taken to bring it together. But there's one key thing I really want to reiterate. I want to click one more time, Saurabh, is that you really have to keep the humans in the loop. So with this, it is not the fact that the documentation is generated and it's automatically sent out the door. Even with Epic and doing their pilots, all of them, you have the documentation generated, and then a human has to eyeball it and make sure it's accurate and then revise it and sign off on that. If you have the human in the loop and they're reviewing that documentation and then sending it along its way, perfect. And you need to be able to have that output in a way that they can modify it, right? So with looking at Health Cloud and that documentation is generated, you usually want to put it in a format that they're interacting with and they can update it and then save it. And so just keep that in mind in your use case and this workflow, you have to put that in there. If you do not put in the stop where the human validates it, you're keeping the human in the loop and they read, validate it and save it, you're actually not being compliant from a healthcare perspective. You can't just template what you're saying. It's a big ding in the healthcare world of documentation. So I just wanted to really, really call that out on the case management side. Next. All right, MedTech, sales and marketing. Let me be very candid. Those of you who engage with me on LinkedIn know I'm always candid. This is not Health Cloud until they get a patient. All of this in sales and marketing is Sales Cloud and Sales AI. So when you're looking, whether you're trying to sell an X-ray machine or you're trying to do digital health, it is very much about market share, and it is basically getting the market share with the providers and getting the market share with the consumers or patients, right? And it is very, very competitive. And right now, many, many digital companies are coming in saying, we are going to save healthcare with our devices. So that's the marketing on this, and the initiatives is very, very, very competitive. Saurabh, you want to click for me? So what we're looking at is when you're looking through the lens, up until they get the patient, you don't need a Health Cloud. What you're really focusing on, you're using Sales Cloud, Sales AI. Once you onboard your patients, then you're engaging Health Cloud. So what you're looking at is Einstein GPT for the sales emails, call summaries, Einstein conversation insights, customer signaling, as well as Sales Cloud, Einstein predictive forecasting. Once you get your consumer, your patient, whomever, and you start absorbing and consuming that, if it's a digital health, you definitely will have your Health Cloud components there, or you're looking at providers for X-ray machines, you probably will never have a patient. You're just selling medical devices. You may be selling trunk stock. Health Cloud, it's not as relevant there for that unless you want to use the field service, sales, trunk stock, and the manufacturing that was built into the Health Cloud. So those are different things that you need to keep in mind when you're actually working in this space. Where are you at and what do you need to use? If you're not consuming patient or consumer information, then you actually, Health Cloud, of course, any Salesforce AE that's going to listen to this recording is not going to love me for that, but let me be very candid. These are the things you need to take in consideration when you're looking at this. And that's it. I think some of our use cases, when it's on the sales part of it, very easy. When you're consuming and having health information, then you have to be very, very careful and keep the human in the loop and do not, don't trust it. Tread carefully. And here's some additional use cases. I'm going to hand it to Saurabh because we have a lot of additional use cases we can go through, and we have some demos.
All right. Thank you so much, Tina and Jake. And my apologies for the clicking around a little bit. So one of the things we really wanted to do was just get into some of these areas and look at what you can do today. And the idea is to understand the value that it can bring, and hopefully you're able to take a look and see if those are viable for your organization, for your businesses. So let's start with looking at some healthcare service related things. In Health Cloud, you have care plans, right? And you have goals related with them. And to Tina's earlier point on documentation, here's an example where if you look at classic care plan and goals, they're basically a related list of things associated with this care plan record, right? And what we are doing here is we're using AI to essentially go through all of that content and come up with a summary of the patient care plan. So if you need to use this as a draft to create your own documentation, put it in Epic or other electronic health record system, or send it to the government because, they are Medicare, one of those things. So you have all of those opportunities to do that. And the intention of all of this is that AI is reducing the grunt work, but to Tina's and Jake's earlier point, you still want the human in the loop. You do not want this thing to automatically summarize this, send it to another system. That's really not where it is right now. Maybe one day in future, but not today. This is a very classic example of that. Another one is around eliminating grunt work from follow-up emails. So if you're selling in the MedTech space, pharma, provider, payer, wherever, right, you may have those use cases where you are going out and selling insurance to very large businesses. And you may want to, generate email drafts using AI, because what it's doing here is it's essentially traversing all of the past conversation that has happened if they're logged into Salesforce. So your tasks, your activities, your email history. And based on that, it's coming up with this first draft. And so it's not a generic reply. It's not a templated version where we're just sticking dear first name, right? Like this is much, much more specific than that. And it's looking at all the objections a customer may have had, all the, inquiries they've had, and it can essentially create your first draft. Again, what we've seen is if you were spending 10 minutes earlier writing an email from scratch, with this, you're probably spending 3 to 4 because it already has a lot of that context. And we can, there's a lot of fancy talk about what AI can do. I frankly think there is a ton of value in these kind of very, very simple use cases where your sales reps now automatically get, 6 minutes saved on every email they send out. And they probably send 5, even if they send 10 emails a day, just following up on opportunities, that's an hour more in their life to be able to sell or relax or whatever. So that's another example of that. Tina or Jake, curious if any of you has anything to add to one or two of these things that we have shown so far.
I think the staff time saving is huge, right? As we look at the cost burdens across all of healthcare, we're looking at consistently being asked, how can I do more things with fewer people? How can we do more things with the same number of people, right? And let people naturally attrit. And the way to do that is to let people work at the highest level of their licensure, which is a thing we've been talking about on the clinical side for literally forever. But as we think about the administrative and the operational side, how do we take the manual and the documentation components and make that as easy as we possibly can so that people can do the challenging things that we hired them to do?
Absolutely. All right. So one of the things I forgot to mention is we will actually demo some of these use cases at the end of these slides. So just probably maybe another 10 minutes of slide. The other thing that's interesting is we actually have another use case that's not listed here, which is really around documents and how you can analyze documents. It's something that we've been working on. So that's like a very early release beta thing that we're going to show you and see what you all think. So definitely hang around for that. It'll be interesting. Another angle on this is around patient sentiment, right? Like if you have Service Cloud or Health Cloud and you have cases, you can actually use AI to look at sentiment on every one of the case or every one of the case comment, case activity, things like that. And you can see how the sentiment changes over time as someone engages with your brand or with your customer's organization. And again, the idea is we want to be proactive in understanding about the quality of care given, right? You don't want to wait till the end. You're like, hey, you visited us. Here's a survey. How was it? And what you're trying to do is instead, you're trying to make sure that you are able to deduct a lot of it using AI. And if it starts to track negatively for a while, then you know that this may need a little bit more intervention to make sure that we are offering a very optimal experience for care, or whoever our end customer is. If they may not be patients, they may be your customers if you're selling MedTech devices. And so any of those B2B, B2C scenarios, you have the opportunity to understand how your end user experiences and deliver better on it if you need to. Another area that's
One thing,
quite...
Saurabh, let me jump in here if I could real quick.
Please.
A hard reality in your larger enterprise organizations who can afford to do this, right? So this is not inexpensive. Not only the implementation, but also the maintenance, is that you have to get through legal and compliance. And if you do not assure legal and compliance how the patient or member data is being shared, so this right here, someone has a customer inquiry, and if they're, how they're feeling and so forth, well, that's assuming you're pushing through information that could be tied back to the member. And if you're looking at PII and PHI and so forth, that can cause grave concern. So when you're going to present this and actually looking at engagement for this and getting the buy-in from your organization, you have to make sure you address the legal concerns and the data security. And otherwise, just don't even bother showing up or trying to make this proposal for engagement. I want to be really careful in making sure. And that's why it's for those, attend the AI ones where they talk about security and the risk and things like that, because I do not see large healthcare organizations embracing this quickly, just because they have to get comfortable with the idea, right? They all need to slowly warm up to this.
Absolutely. And we do talk about security a little bit later in our deck, but I think it's an extremely well put point. And I think it's true for healthcare, it's true for financial services, true for regulated sector at large. And in general, I think there is a lot that needs to and continues to happen in the AI space to alleviate some of those concerns, but 100% point taken, very, very valid. The other similar area is around understanding concerns that someone has and really addressing them faster. In a number of cases, there is so much back and forth that happens before sometimes you can get to the heart of what's the problem. So it may be something as simple as summarizing 15 interactions on email and someone going into your community's experience cloud website and putting their comments and all of that. You want the ability to very, very quickly understand what are they saying. The other thing is, if their sentiments are negative, you want to highlight that, right? Maybe it's a red bar, maybe it's a flag, maybe it's a visual indicator, so that your managers, your users go, wait, why is this thing red? Why is this person not happy? What is it that we can do better? So there's a lot in this space where generative AI can be of assistance. Again, what Tina mentioned earlier holds a lot of water on this, right? There is security, privacy, regulatory concerns to make sure that we are addressing this correctly. Another area that I find very interesting, and I've seen a lot of use cases of this even in the non-healthcare scenario, is to really look at a customer 360 kind of a view. And the thing that's interesting here is this is not a reporting image, right? The content that you see here on summary is AI generated. It is not in Salesforce in this exact form, right? So AI can scan through all of these cases, surface up a summary. You can do similarly for care plans. You can do similarly for opportunities. And the intention of all of this is that you are able to offer a snapshot of the life of Mr. Charles Green, right? Like that's the idea, that we can look at this, pull this information together and make it easier, reduce the grunt work that someone has to go through just come up to speed on the patient. Today, a fair bit of this also happens manually when people are typing notes. And I think it would continue a portion of it, but a portion of it AI can help and at least create the first draft. And always the logical idea is if you let AI create the first draft, then human in the loop, you intervene, you make sure it is correct, it is factual, it is the kind of quality of information you wanted, and then it gets presented out to your consumers of this information. Any comment, Jake or Tina, on any of this before I move on? I will take that as no. All right. So let's talk a little bit about security and architecture and some of the things that Tina was mentioning. Let's start with a little bit of clarification. We've all heard of ChatGPT and maybe about OpenAI. What's the difference? So ChatGPT is a consumer-facing website. Think of it as, the equivalent of Google for search, right? You go to Google, you search, you go to ChatGPT, you can try out prompts and you can try out AI. And they're single-handedly responsible for making AI mainstream, right? On the other hand, if you're an enterprise, you're probably not using ChatGPT. The one thing I forgot to mention is ChatGPT, the underlying technology, the underlying AI engine is called OpenAI. And it turns out the organization running this whole thing is also called OpenAI. So it may get a little confusing. But this OpenAI engine, your organization can use this if they wanted on Microsoft Azure, for example, right? So the point is, when you're looking at enterprise applications, you're not going to a consumer-facing website. OpenAI itself has now, like yesterday, released an OpenAI for enterprise with a significantly larger security footprint. Your data is not used for training. It's not accessible by others. Like, they are addressing a lot of those things which were initially a concern. But you frankly don't even need this. If you want, you can get the same engine on something like Azure, and then you have your isolated instance. Your organization can completely lock it down to their heart's content. You can do something similar with Amazon Web Services, with Google Cloud. You can do it with Salesforce. Salesforce is also hosting a couple of these AI models. So you have a lot of ways to, first and foremost, bring a lot of security and tighten this around. The second portion of this is, when you think about AI and Salesforce, you have to look at what all it can do for you, right? Like, the considerations from an architecture perspective is, you have Salesforce, you have some AI, integration capability. We built one called GPTfy, that's on App Exchange. Salesforce has AI Cloud. You can write your own if you so want. And essentially what's happening is, in this secure perimeter of where your Salesforce information is living, you want to integrate out with one or more of these AI technologies. And when you're doing this, you want to think about prompt engineering. How are you going to do prompts, and who's going to write them? How do you secure them? How do you ground them? We'll talk a little bit more, show you a little bit more of that. And you want to think about usability and adoption, right? Those are areas that need to be important considerations when we are thinking about it, followed very, very closely with security and privacy. Now, for something like healthcare, this may reverse, and this may be your number one priority. But the intention here is that you want to think about all of this holistically and ensure that your initiatives with AI are successful as you embark on this voyage. And the third part is, how do you enable it across the enterprise? So one of the things on those lines is, if you want to bring data that is not inside Salesforce, today what you can do, at least what we've built with GPTfy, is you are able to use external objects inside Salesforce. So your Salesforce can, if you're surfacing data from non-Salesforce systems inside Salesforce, you can then also, take it forward and process it with AI, assuming it's okay from a security and privacy perspective. So it's a little complex, but think of it this way, that you may not have to replicate non-Salesforce data in Salesforce. You can pull it through Salesforce Connect, which is a product that Salesforce sells. And you can share it inside Salesforce using external objects. Again, very configurable, very declarative way of doing it. And then you can have all of this go to AI and come back. So there's a lot of capability to expand this into the enterprise if you need to. So let's talk about security a little bit more from inside Salesforce. So you may have heard of what Salesforce calls the trust layer. And we've also built something similar called security layer. And the idea is very, very simple with all of these. We are extracting information out of Salesforce. It may be your opportunity cases, patient-related information, whatever. It may be emails, it may be activities, it may be contacts, it may be custom objects that you have. And you pull all of this information and you remove all the PII, PHI, all of that, information from it. We've built a lot of capability so that you can securely mask it. And again, that's an important criteria for anybody. So if you're thinking of building something, buying something, you want to make sure there is a robust security layer, which essentially pulls out all PII, PHI that your organization may be concerned about. And it sends masked information to your OpenAI or whatever AI technology you're using. So for example, in this case, instead of Doug, it says person one, right? So you are anonymizing this or masking it. and then sending it over. You send an optimized prompt with it, which is really in context of what you're trying to do, explains to AI very, very clearly. And then, you get back information. So let's say I was summarizing. I'd be like, hey, summarize everything for Saurabh, right? And pull all the related cases, opportunities, all of this. So, we remove information for Saurabh and we replace it with person one. Saurabh has these health conditions. We can remove a lot of that information, mask it. If it's not pertinent to the question in hand, send it over with an optimized prompt. AI, does its processing, gives me back a summary. Then we re-identify it. So we replace person one with Saurabh again, and then we present it to the end user. We may also update fields based on that. So you can see how all of this under the hood can work. Combine this with locking down your AI instance, and then you have a reasonable element of security that is retaining PII, PHI inside Salesforce. And then even then on the AI model side, it's still locking it down. So hopefully this makes sense in terms of how it's, addressing some of these requirements. So I'm going to jump into a demo, but before I do, Jake or Tina, any quick comments from you?
I just echo the security and privacy stuff. I think the fastest way to stop something in healthcare in its tracks is when we get lawyers involved. And that's so crucial to build understanding of where information is going. And to Saurabh's point about how are we making sure that we're not inputting this data to go and train the model again and that things aren't leaving the firewall. They're crucial conversations to bring folks into early from privacy and compliance, and to really understand what are the use cases that we can take on and what are the use cases that we're going to wait on. Even if it's less exciting for the things we can do now, it's building that trust that I think is critical.
Right. Tina, any comments before I move on?
No, you did an excellent job of covering it. I think there might be, something. Dreamforce is only, a couple of weeks away. So we all know that at that point, there's going to be some new announcements, things will change. Salesforce has been doubling down on Data Cloud. So there's a very good possibility that Salesforce, knowing how difficult it is and some of the challenges, especially in the industries and when they have financial health cloud and others are highly regulated, government, things like that, that they may have a path forward for getting through that. So they've been really focusing on Einstein Trust and how do they really convey that. So it'd be very interesting if they're saying, look, you can end up, and I'm guessing here, but what if they're saying, here's your database, here's Data Cloud, and then we integrate that in and doing this. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Salesforce helps us from when we're implementing this, what they can provide us. So it'll be very fascinating what Dreamforce brings forward. Really, I'm looking forward to it, because why would they come out from the very beginning talking about trust? They know that's their biggest obstacle. So it'll be, a couple of weeks, we can be having a much different conversation.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. Every customer I've spoken with, like, security and trust is a huge issue, regardless of the industry. It's beyond healthcare, right? Like, everybody's fascinated by these technologies, but at the same time worried by these technologies. All right, let me jump into a demo here really quickly. I'm going to bring my other screen here. Are you able to see my other browser window or not?
No, we see the slide grid view.
All right. Apologies. Let me do that again. Let me share. Just share the whole desktop. All right. How about now?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So let's take a look at some of these very, very quickly. And here is a use case. We are in Health Cloud, and you're looking at a diabetes care plan for Charles Green. And as you can see, there is some information. There's like all these related goal assignments for Charles. And the idea is, how do I get a summary for this? So if I go back to this, I can just go here. I can do patient care plan summary. And basically what it's doing is it's pulling all the data that we talked about here. It's anonymizing it, sending it to AI, getting back a response, re-injecting that PII, and then it'll just present it to us once it's done with all of this. the idea is, with a single click, you are able to get a summary like this in a couple of seconds. And the intention with all of this is constantly it goes back to what Tina was talking about, which was documentation, right? So you want to reduce the amount of effort, the grunt work it takes to document these things manually. So I have something here. I can click on this, and now it is in my clipboard. I can go on a notepad, edit it. I can put it in another system. I can edit this and do whatever I want with it. I can create a report out of it if I was. So we've talked with customers who do work for Medicare, Medicaid type patients, and they do need to do a summary document for a much more detailed thing. And one of the things that is of interest is, can I use something like this to create the first draft that my care provider can then tweak and make sure that it is complete and submit. And what they find is that it can dramatically reduce the amount of time people would have otherwise spent doing this. So I think this is definitely going to happen. The concerns around security, privacy are extremely well founded, and they will get mitigated because the economic incentive to do something like this is pretty significant. Any comments, Tina or Jake, before I move on to the other ones? Okay. All right, moving on. Oops, I did not realize I had maximized this. Okay. So another example of this is, sort of the account 360. And the intention here is, again, I'm looking at this patient and I can pull all the related cases, all the care plan that he has. And you can see that all of the summarization of that is coming here. Very similar idea. You can just go click on this and it will bring all of this information. So I'll let it do that in a minute. But what you're seeing here is, right, this is AI generated. And hopefully it eliminates a lot of effort that I would have put if I was clicking on this and then going here and then looking at everything that has happened on this case, all the related, all the related stuff. And the more regulation intensive an industries, the more data they generate like this. So the idea that you are able to do this very, very quickly is definitely, in the favor of our users. And it reduces all of this grunt work. So back to this, I can click on run. I'll let this thing run, but you get a hang of how this is working. The third part of this that I really like is, now I'm on this case and I want to send a follow-up email, right? I can click a button on this. And again, in the context of this case, an email gets generated, right? I can take this, I can click on this button, and if you use Salesforce to send your emails, it's here and you can make changes to it. So it's still a draft, human in the loop, or you can copy it, paste it in your Outlook or whatever and do it from there, right? So that is the intention of these things. One thing that is very interesting with a lot of these kind of things that we are talking about is that I can go here and I can see what was the information that was sent to AI. So here is an example of data that we pulled. Data that then we processed in terms of anonymizing, sent it to AI, we got back a response. So there is complete auditability of what was sent, what was received, what was the prompt, all of that is there. If I go to this account 360 here, you can see the same thing here. And what you're starting to see is that you have the ability to significantly influence what information is pulled together. So these are some of the use cases that you can do with technologies today. This is running GPTfy, our product, but you can do these with, I'm guessing, AI Cloud or anything else that you want to use. One thing that I want to show, which is just brand spanking new that we are working on, and I think is of relevance to healthcare in particular, is there is a lot of attrition that has happened in some of these industries, as Jake was pointing earlier, from COVID onwards. And recruitment is a pretty important area there. So I'm going to show you a really interesting scenario that one of our customers asked for. We now do document comparison. So like I have a custom object which has a job description. Like this one is a bit technical, but if let's say you are hiring, care workers or therapists or nurses, so now you can do basically attach files to this. So I have a bunch of files that I can attach. And this takes a bit of time because it's going to do file processing, but it's going to take these PDFs And essentially, it's going to try and match them against these responsibilities. And it will come back with a response. So it'll scan through all these documents, pull all the information out, match it against the responsibilities, and tell you what it thinks is a good fit. The intention of a lot of these technologies is that you are able to eliminate the grunt work, but I can tell you right now that a lot of these things still boil down to human in the loop. As long as you think about it, as long as this is not automated processing where you go, oh yeah, I'm just going to run this thing in a batch and it's going to run through 5,000 resumes and pick some. I kind of think that is not where AI is today. And frankly, I think in some areas that may also be illegal because it introduces a bias. The intention of these technologies is that it gives you a summarization of things so that instead of churning through, tons and tons of content, you are just looking at these things and you're going, okay, who has a relevant experience, right? So it's looking at these three folks and it's going, okay, these are the skills that match. And now I can go, dive deeper into their resumes and make sure that I am picking up the ones which are.
No, okay. No. So we already have people using GPT to create resumes. You're going to have GPT read resumes. And then eventually someone's going to get a phone call from a voice bot saying, hey, answer these prompts. And then you get to the point. We're already having providers are submitting claims to payers. They're going to end up having, the payers are going to have automation to go through and look at, pre-auth or denials. And you're going to have providers, and you're going to get to the point, even though we say keep the human in the loop, the urge to cut the bottom line to increase the revenue, right, to reduce costs, the temptation is people are going to automate this, and we can say human in the loop. And when it comes to clinical, it's absolute. Clinical, we need to. But something even as innocent as this, where we're going to read resumes and do comparison, or we're going to automate do processes, which I've read many articles before this call, and to see what's the industry saying is they keep saying, well, at the end of the day, we have to have a human in the loop, and we know that there's going to be organizations that are going to be like, the percentage of risk is fine. We're going to just automate this, and which brings up a lot of ethical questions. Right. Absolutely. So it's going to be very interesting. At the end of the day, it's going to be, to do no harm is the mandate of healthcare. Actually, it's not just Google, it is healthcare, right? The Hippocratic Oath. And I think Google says do no harm, but it summarizes it well. In healthcare, we should not do harm. And the opportunity is here for people to rush in, and even if something as simple as this, I'm laughing because a lot of people are using GPT to write their resumes. So you just validated. Go read the job description. GPT, here's the job description. Create a resume that will fill those boxes.
It's your AI versus mine. No, I think that's a fair point. And I think the intention here was like, this is an example that, our engineers basically put together. But the intention is you can analyze documents, right? Like to me, the part that is very interesting is if, you look at like, a document that has side effects of medications, right? You look at these very large white papers that someone is looking at. Can I pull a summarization of it for somebody to understand, do I go deeper into this, right? It's that kind of stuff where I think there is a lot of interesting areas of opportunity. I agree with you that, like, again, there's a lot of unanswered questions in terms of ethics, in terms of security. I mean, I'm in this space and I can tell you there are, right? And it's a new cutting edge technology. It will have to go through the same sort of maturity cycle that we've seen with cloud computing, which we've seen with just technology in general, right? We were doing stuff on paper and we went to digital signatures. Almost every one of those technology changes has, come with a lot of these kind of challenges that have to be addressed. And I think that's the part I love about a conversation like this, is that you get these cross-section of very diverse opinions, because you need to. None of us completely understands the right and the wrong here. That's the good news and the bad news, right? And we are going to continue to go down some of these paths and, follow those guiding principles like do no harm, right? And find out what lives up to those principles. and where is the viability of ideas like these. So totally taken. I'm very curious. Jake, if you have any comment on this as well, I'm curious to hear.
I was joking before the presentation that I have a 5 a.m. meeting on Friday of next week with a CIO of an East Coast-based health system, and one of their primary concerns is recruitment and retention. And so I went over to www.careers, and they have this nice little chat bot. And as I engaged with this chat bot, it's clearly discriminative and it's just trash, right? It asks me what I want to do, and I tell it, and it doesn't understand that. And then it comes back and asks me where I want to physically work, what zip code or city and state that I want to work in. And I tell it that I want to work remotely, because I do. And it says, that's not a zip code. And then I give it my zip code, and it says, that's not in my recognized list of zip codes because I'm not in the same geo. And it's the stupidest engagement in the world. It's a really good opportunity for a generative bot that's going to improve experience, that's going to improve the number of inbound applications and make it easier for someone to climb the hill of figuring out what jobs might be good for them. But it's not going to put, as Tina is correctly mentioning, a problematic AI algorithm that we're not super sure about how it works. But it could totally tell me what are the 5 jobs in IT or leadership or whatever I might be interested in. Or if I'm a nurse, I can put in my certifications, and then it'll tell me here are the jobs and the units that you might be interested in. So those use cases, I think, totally abound. But this is the exact conversation that we should be having of where is it worthwhile? Where is it safe from a patient perspective? But where is it safe from a usability perspective? Because what we don't want to do is have like GPT talking to GPT talking to GPT, and then just sort of assuming that the world is fine, because that, like, I don't want to live in Terminator.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I'm so glad we're having this dialogue. All right, I know we are at time. I'm going to really quickly talk a little bit about some of the resources for folks on the call where you can get and go from there. Let's see for this. All right, resources. So you can get a health cloud use case data sheet on this link. If you want, you can scan this bit.ly code. What we have done is we have put everything in one LinkedIn group. So there's another one which talks about the future of AI and some of the things that you both mentioned around, like, how do you even go forward with some of these areas? So you can go to this LinkedIn group, and this is on, sorry, I did say LinkedIn. So this is on LinkedIn for Enterprise Dreaming, and you can just join here. So every session that we are recording, every piece of content here, every PDF, you will have access to from this group. So please do join in there. And the next webinar we're doing is on security, very timely given the conversations we are having. And it would be good to see if folks here would like to join. If there are any questions, any comments from anybody, then we can take those now. Tina and Jake, anything you want to add to what you've heard so far?
No, thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, with that, we come to the conclusion of this thing. Thank you so much, everyone.